Welcome, everybody. It is my pleasure to introduce you to a brand new course, Think Good and It Will Be Good, taught by Rabbi Dr. Zeff. Rabbi Dr. Zeff holds a bachelor's degree in Hebrew language and literature, a master's degree in Jewish history, rabbinic ordination from Yeshiva University, and a doctorate in pastoral counseling. Rabbi Dr. Zeff is particularly interested in the interface between psychology, spirituality, and ethics. And he is well known as an unusually gifted speaker and teacher, and a compassionate, wise, and skilled therapist. I can't wait to learn from Rabbi Zeff, and I am so blessed to be able to be a part of today's class. Rabbi Zeff, it's an honor for all of us to be here with you today. Thank you so much for teaching us. And without any further ado, I'd like to hand over the floor to you. Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi Fishman. And audibility is good for everybody? Okay. If you hear children or dogs, so we have, because of the situation in Israel now, we're actually housing a substantial part of our family from all over Israel. So we have 4 grandchildren in the house, about 4 or 5, we have 9 children, 4 or 5 of our children, a couple of sons-in-law that aren't in uniform, and etc., and 2 dogs. So it's quite a lot of action around here. Now, obviously, the timing of this discussion is taking place in a context which is really gut-wrenching. And as Rabbi Fishman had mentioned previously, I think before the recording started, that it is possible that there will be an interruption, a siren may go off, and we may have to prematurely end the lecture. But you'll have a front row seat for what it's like to live in the Holy Land. And I also want to say something about Rabbi Fishman. So I didn't realize we go back. As we get older, you sort of lose your sense of time. But I guess we've traveled along we co-journeyed together for a few decades. Wow. And I feel very close to Rabbi Fishman. And I visited your shul when you were the rabbi in Montreal, and the holy work you're doing now. I'm sure those of you who know Rabbi Fishman know that he's particularly intelligent, serious, deep, and articulate. He also has a heck of a lot of integrity, and he walks the talk, right? His Zionism, his love for the Holy Land, finally became actualized in a commitment. It was not simple, because many rabbis, I always have this feeling they could be buried in the backyard of their synagogue. They're there for 40 years, and it's wonderful. They're doing important work. And to be able to do important work outside of Israel, and yet to make that decision to come and live in the Holy Land, so that one is no longer just a spectator to the center of Jewish history, but a participant, it takes a lot of guts. And it's not a simple issue, because someone like Rabbi Fishman is doing really holy work outside of Israel. So it's not just simply a personal issue of his personal aspirations versus professional, etc. It's really a gut-wrenching issue. And so I feel very close to you.
Thank you.
Very, very honored to be part of this educational program for Shar Shamayim.
Thank you very much.
Now, given that same context, I want to dedicate all of our learning that's going to be in the next hour to the elevation of the souls of those who have fallen in the past week. It's unbelievable. It's only a week. It seems like it's been months. And dedicate our learning to the healing of those that are wounded, and to the speedy and safe return of those who have been abducted by those who have lost any semblance of humanity. Okay, on that serious note. Now, by the way, I'll just premise with something so you'll understand my speaking style. So I live in a little community called Alon Shvut. It has a famous yeshiva here. You may have heard of it. They sometimes call it the Gush Yeshiva. So this community, I would say about 20% of the community are rabbis, maybe more. And so when I'm asked to speak to the congregation in Alon Shvut, it's a little terrifying, because I'm speaking to hundreds of rabbis. That's a little bit of a different thing. And there's something about all in truth. I can't explain it. Maybe Rabbi Fishman can, that you're not allowed to smile when you're teaching. There's like a very serious and intellectual demeanor that you have to have. And that's hard for me to not smile because I just love learning so much. I love exploring and I get very excited. So I was once speaking before the congregation in all its truth, and someone came up to me afterwards. They said, I'm not sure about what you said, but you really seem to love the Torah. So because you smile. So if I get a little animated and smile, even though we're in the middle of a war, it doesn't reflect any indifference to the context that we're living in right now. It reflects my love and delight in Torah. That's a apology in advance. Okay. What I want to do today is to explore how the teachings of Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, and we'll talk about him in a few minutes, can be used as a very, very powerful tool to achieve a greater sense of wholeness in life, a sense of meaning, a sense of joy. And I need to back up just a minute to explain the connection between Rabbi Kook and a particular form of therapy. So I think Rabbi Fishman did mention that I have a degree in pastoral counseling and I'm an active therapist. My degree in pastoral counseling, believe it or not, is from a Presbyterian theological seminary. That's not Jewish. That's not one of the Jewish denominations. And it was really a marvelous experience being, I think, the only Jew there. Certainly the only rabbi there. And when it came time to write my dissertation, I met with my faculty advisor, who was a professor of pastoral counseling. He was also a Presbyterian minister. And we were talking, and I shared with him some teachings of Rabbi Kook. It's hard for me to hold back. I'll share it with anybody, even Presbyterian ministers. And he said to me, you know what? You need to write something that was in the realm of cognitive therapy, because that's the way Rav Kook thinks, and it seems the way you think as well. So let's talk a little bit about what cognitive therapy is, and then we'll talk about Rav Kook, and you'll understand why the teachings of Rav Kook can be such a powerful tool to be used in a therapeutic setting. I'm going to show you something here. I wasn't planning on doing this. I don't know if this is shameless or not. It's not for sale yet. This is my dissertation here, and it's called Think Good and It Will Be Good, a resource for Jewish pastoral counseling. And the premise behind that dissertation is that the teachings of Rav Kook not only resonate the principles of pastoral counseling, but they can be used actually as a therapeutic tool in a counseling session. And I do that. Now, I have to be very judicious about it. I don't do it with everybody. The timing has to be right, and it has to be presented in the right way. But the premise is that Rav Kook's teachings are so embedded in a very effective therapeutic technique that they can actually be used as a tool in the therapeutic process of healing. So let's just briefly talk about what cognitive therapy is, or cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. So we'll do a little screen share here. Hopefully this is going to work out. All right. And let's see here. So Rabbi Fishman, did you empower me? Because oh, there we go. Okay, it worked. Okay. What do you see? Did it show up? Okay, fantastic. Okay, So let's talk about the premise of cognitive therapy. And that premise is the relationship between the way you think and the way you feel. How does that work? So let's just start here at the bottom. Now, this is from a book called Feeling Good by Dr. David Burns. He's a psychiatrist who wrote probably the best-selling book ever on cognitive behavioral therapy, and he's my Rebbe of sorts. He's not Jewish. He's the son of a minister, and I study with him. So here's us over here, and there's reality. This is the world we live in, the reality. Okay. Now, that reality, in fact, is perceived through certain lenses, right? So thoughts, you interpret the event with thoughts flowing through your mind, right? The event does not necessarily dictate in and of itself the way we experience that reality. It's the thoughts that we have about that reality which then dictate our experience and generate emotions. Two people can experience the exact same reality, and for one person, it can be a positive experience, and for another person, the exact same circumstance could be devastating, because the reality itself does not dictate our experience of it. It is the assumptions and the thoughts that we have about that reality. It's what we call the cognitive lenses that we use to perceive that reality. And now we go to here, feelings created by your thoughts. You assign a meaning to the event, right? That the meaning to the event is not dictated by the event. It's dictated by the premises, the assumptions, the thoughts we have about that event. Now, this has very powerful implications, because if we can identify what are those lenses that we're using to experience that particular event, what are the assumptions that we have, what are the thoughts that we have as we go through that event that are producing emotional pain, of depression, of anxiety, etc. If we can identify what those lenses are, and it could be that those lenses need some adjustment. Perhaps those lenses are having us perceive the world in a way which is not realistic, in a way which is distorted. And that unrealistic way of experiencing the world, because of our assumptions and our thoughts, our cognitive lenses, that then produces this anxiety, the depression, etc. If we can become aware of those distortions and fix those distortions, go get another pair of glasses from the psychological optometrist, our emotions then will respond accordingly in a way which is not painful, which is not suffused with feelings of depression or anxiety. Is that pretty clear so far? Okay. So this is a quote from David Burns, the guru. When you change the way you think, you can change the way you feel. And that's what cognitive therapy does, or cognitive behavioral therapy does. It examines what are our thoughts and assumptions behind those emotions. It empowers us with certain techniques to notice whatever kind of distortions there are in those thoughts and assumptions, helps us to put on different pair of glasses, and then we feel different. Our experience of reality is different, more positive. Now, this idea was not invented by psychologists in the 20th century. By the way, we should note that this is very different than classical psychoanalysis. Right? This is very different than Freud. Right? Classical psychoanalysis means that you spend 3 days a week on, and I'm not exaggerating, until this day, I don't know who can afford it, on the couch of the psychoanalyst, deeply exploring the subconscious, childhood experiences, infant experiences, etc. Cognitive behavioral therapy is very focused and short-term. That's why it's become probably the most popular form of therapy practiced in the Western world. So this idea goes way back. It was popularized 2,000 years ago by a Greek philosopher, Epictetus. And he said the following: men are disturbed not by things. It's not the reality that disturbs us, but by the principles and notions which they form concerning things. 2,000 years ago. Okay. Now, there's a wonderful Yiddish saying which seems to express the same idea. And that's actually the title for the series that we're going to be doing in the next few weeks. And this is a saying in Yiddish from Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Lubavitch. That is not the Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the most recent Lubavitcher Rebbe, but this was actually the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he said in Yiddish, and I have it there in transliteration in English letters and also in Yiddish here, right? Tracht gut wird sein gut. If you think good, it'll be good. Okay? That's the premise of cognitive therapy, that we have a painful existence, often emotionally, as a function of not thinking good. If we can adjust our thinking, our experience of reality changes profoundly. I just want to point out, for the sake of intellectual honesty, that in fact, that saying of think good and it will be good is even perhaps more radical than contemporary cognitive therapy. Why? Because cognitive therapy, the idea is, I have an experience. It's upsetting. It's upsetting because I'm viewing it through distorted lenses. But I didn't control the experience per se. The experience happened, right? There's a circumstance. Something happened. I failed a test. It happened. Now, how do I view that? Am I failing the test? Okay. But look at this wonderful quote from Simon Jacobson. Some of you may have heard of him. He's a very popular Chabad rabbi who has something called Meaningful Life Center, which popularizes the teachings of Chabad Hasidic philosophy, especially as applicable to psychological well-being. Look what he says here in his interpreting that idea. The entire concept of reality is actually turned inside out. We tend to think that there is an objective reality out there. We attempt to experience it and then to comprehend it. The truth is that it is not reality that shapes our perception. It is our perception that shapes our reality. Now, that's a really amazing statement. So let me just make sure everybody follows that last sentence there. So in cognitive therapy, we say that it's not the reality which dictates our emotions. It's our thoughts and assumptions which dictate our emotions, our experience of that reality. But in Chabad, that expression, thinking it will be good, is going one radical step further and is saying that it's not just our thoughts that determine how we experience reality, but our thoughts can actually shape that reality, the objective reality. Now, this gets into some really interesting Kabbalistic ideas, which Rabbi Fishman would love to talk about at another time, but it's way too deep for me. So we're not going to address that Kabbalistic interpretation of this notion. I just want to show you on a practical level how a psychotherapist would use the assumptions of cognitive therapy. So this is something that's used a lot by many CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy practitioners. And we divide it up into a couple of different categories. So there's an upsetting event. Mary is very upset. I don't know if you can read that there. It might be too small. Mary's very upset in the wake of receiving a low score on a test. She's horribly depressed. So, okay, there was an event, and she's upset about it. Now, let's first see if we can identify what's she feeling. So this particular tool here, called a mood log, which Dr. David Burns invented, makes it very simple, right? You just sort of put an X in the box. You know, how are you feeling about this, that you failed your test? Well, I'm super sad. Between 0 and 100%, 80. That's how sad I am about it, right? I'm also feeling inadequate. I give that a 90, sort of measuring the amount of inadequacy I feel. I'm feeling embarrassed about it, that I failed the test. Give that a 95. I feel so discouraged, etc. So we lay out what I'm feeling. So now we get to the core. Well, okay, what are you thinking? So she's thinking, you ask her, Mary, this is what you're feeling. We understand that now. What thoughts were going through your mind that are generating that set of feelings? Answer, that I'm a complete loser. I know nobody here has ever felt like a complete loser. Isn't that right? Sometimes we do, and it hurts. And how powerful does she feel about that assumption as a complete loser? Give it a number between 0 and 100, 90. Right? Now we say, okay, Mary, you have this thought that you're a complete loser. Let's think about that thought for a second. Now let's just go down here. This is also from Dr. Burns. He's a very sort of methodical thinker. And he was able to categorize all the different distorted lenses that we use to see reality, perceive reality, that make us absolutely miserable. And he likes using very down-to-earth terms, all or nothing thinking, overgeneralizations, mental filter, discounting the positive, etc. So we then ask Mary, okay, you have this thought, I'm a complete loser. I wonder if that thought makes any sense. Let's think about it for a second. And just for fun, I'm just going to, it's a little hard to do this in Zoom, but let's try a little experiment here. The thought, I'm a complete loser because I got a low score on that test. Can anybody identify, you can sort of unmute yourself just for a second, if any of these distortions apply to that thought, I'm a complete loser? Anybody like to take a stab at that? All of you cognitive therapists out there. Any thoughts? How about almost every one of them? So all or nothing thinking means you view things absolute black and white categories, right? So she failed one test. So it's all or nothing. She failed one test. So she's nothing. She's a 0. It's 0 or 1. She can't just be somebody who sometimes does good and sometimes does bad in tests. No, it's 0 or 100. And she failed the test, so she's a nothing. How about mental filter, right? The only thing she can think about is the fact that she failed one test. What about the good grade she got in the week before? She's filtering out the positive, right? She only sees the negative, right? And so on and so forth, okay? So if we just go back to the mood log here, so you see the column distortions. So we asked Mary, like, what kind of distortions are involved in that thought? And she goes through it. She says, wow, that's really all or nothing thinking. It's overgeneralizations. It's labeling. I'm a loser. It's a label, right? No one's a label. We're people that are complicated, okay? And then we ask Mary, okay, now that we understand that there are these distortions and we want to make sure that she really internalizes that they're distorted, could you now reformulate the way you might think about what happened when you failed that test, which is more realistic? And so that's that positive thoughts here, in which we then reformulate it, she does, in a way which reflects reality, right? I didn't study hard enough, right? And that's why I failed it. And also I wasn't feeling so good. It's called reattribution, that there's other reasons. It's not just because I'm stupid, wasn't feeling well, etc. Right? I might have failed that test, but the week before I passed. And as a matter of fact, I've passed many tests, etc. And so on and so forth. Okay, so that is how cognitive therapy works. Okay, so far so good. Now, in comes Rav Kook, Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook. Rabbi Kook is born in 1865 in what, from a Jewish point of view, is Lithuania. It actually is Latvia, but Latvia is Lithuania as far as Jewish culture goes. So he's a Litvak. Now, Litvaks are known, whether appropriately or not, this is actually labeling, this is a cognitive distortion right here, to be extremely sharp, to be very focused on technical Talmud study, and to be very intellectual at the expense, perhaps, of emotional involvement in Judaism. Now, this is all exaggerated, but there is some truth to this. The Hasidic movement was a rebellion against that type of culture, which placed such a premium on intellectual scholarship in Judaism, to the downgrading of emotional engagement as part of what the rise of the Hasidic movement was about. Now, Rabbi Kook, even though he is born in this cultural milieu of Lithuania, he's a Litvak. His father was a great Torah scholar who had studied in the McGill University of Lithuania. I was about to say Harvard, but I have to make sure we give due honor to Montreal. McGill, that works, Rabbi Fishman?
It's even better than Harvard. Harvard has not done very well recently.
You're right. Absolutely. I've been following the news.
It's a two for one.
100%. So that was a great yeshiva that was called Volozhin, because it was in a town called Volozhin. It was founded by people who were disciples of a very famous rabbi who was called the Vilna Gaon, one of the greatest Talmudic scholars of all time. So Rabbi Kook's father was a product of that world and a product of that yeshiva. But here's a little bit of shocking information. Rav Kook was a product of what I like to call, whimsically perhaps, a mixed marriage, because his mother came from a Hasidic background, a Chabad Hasidic background. So that's the mixed marriage, that his father is a Lithuanian Talmud scholar, and his mother comes from this Hasidic, soulful, emotional approach towards Judaism. And I believe that Rav Kook's unique approach towards Judaism, which we're about to learn more about in a moment, is due, I believe, largely to his mixed DNA, that he has this Talmudic Lithuanian approach together with a huge Hasidic soul. That's Rabbi Kook. I'm going to share with you a story that really demonstrates this idea. So Rabbi Kook had gone off to yeshiva as an adolescent. They came home. And in those rabbinic circles, if you wanted to give nachas, some pride to your father, especially if your father was a Talmud scholar, you were going to share some kind of intellectual gymnastics analyzing the Talmud. That this page in the Talmud seems to contradict that page in the Talmud. And using intellectual gymnastics, we're going to come up with a brilliant way of reconciling these two particular passages, etc. That would give Rabbi Fishman much nachas, at least the Litvak side of him. So, little Avraham Kook, he's an adolescent, comes home from yeshiva, and his father says, well, tell me about yeshiva. How are things going? That was his invitation for the son to then share some very sophisticated Talmudic gymnastics. And Avremel says, Tati, I'd like to share with you something. He takes out of his pocket a piece of paper. And this little Avremel starts to read a poem describing his passionate love for God. His father is profoundly upset. I sent you to yeshiva to write poems of love for God? That's what you did in yeshiva? The next time that Rabbi Kook, who was not a rabbi yet, came home from yeshiva, he was a quick learner, and he realized that perhaps what he had shared with his father did not accomplish the goal of giving him nachas. And his father said, Remala knew, why don't you share something from your learning in yeshiva? And he takes out a piece of paper. The father's quaking. Oh no, what kind of disastrous poem of love for God is he going to share now? And Rav Kook begins to read a poem, which is all the laws of Hanukkah in rhymed verse. That's Rabbi Kook. We have this poem, and I've studied it. It is a brilliant analysis of Talmudic sources about the holiday of Hanukkah, all in rhyme verse. That is the product of somebody whose father was this Lithuanian Talmud scholar and a mother with the Hasidic soul, the laws of Hanukkah in rhyme verse. Rabbi Kook studied also in the same yeshiva that his father had studied in, Volozhin, which was the McGill University of the time. And then Rabbi Kook was married off to the daughter of one of the most famous rabbis in Eastern Europe. He was the rabbi of a town called Panovich, which is today the name of a very big yeshiva in the town of Bnei Brak in Israel. And Rabbi Kook becomes the rabbi of two towns in Lithuania. In 1904, Rabbi Kook realizes a dream of a lifetime like Rabbi Fishman, and he moves to the Holy Land. He's invited to come to the city of Jaffa, 1904, to become the rabbi of Jaffa, Yaffo. Now you have to remember, in 1904, there's no Tel Aviv. Today, if you look at the official name of Tel Aviv, it's called Tel Aviv Yaffo. It's a hyphenated name. That's actually the official name of Tel Aviv Yaffo. They're built one next to the other. Yaffo is a very ancient city, port city. And there's only Yaffo, and Rav Kook comes to Yaffo. He's the rabbi, not only of the town of Yaffo, but of the pioneering settlements that were built, established along the coast of Israel up into the Galilee. Now let's go back into the land of Israel in 1904. Two warring factions. We have what's sometimes called the old Yishuv or the old settlement. These are very pious Jews that had moved to the land of Israel for spiritual reasons. At the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, this is before Theodor Herzl. And then you had another wave of immigrants that came to the land of Israel, inspired by secular Zionism, largely. Towards the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. And these Jews that are coming as pioneers, they are sometimes called the new Yishuv, the new settlement. They don't see their role in the land of Israel simply to carry on the pious traditions of Judaism, but they see their function as the radical restructuring of what it means to be a Jew. Just to give you a little bit of a taste, there was a particular movement among the Zionists that they called themselves the Canaanites, because they didn't want to identify themselves as Jews at all, that they're going to so radically reformulate what it means to be a Jew that they're going to become a Middle Eastern tribe of Canaanites. Now, if you read anything in the Torah, Canaanites are not exactly the most glorified ethnic group in the land of Israel. We're actually told to displace and destroy the Canaanites, when the Jews entered the land of Israel under Joshua. So that just gives you a taste of how radical some of the secular Zionists were. And Rabbi Kook sees his mission to bring these two warring factions together. Because on the one hand, he's a product of the world of the old Yishuv. If you've ever seen a picture of Rabbi Kook, he looks like a Hasidic rabbi. He wears a long black coat. He has payas. He wears a shtreimel, a furry cap. So he's a product of that world. And that's the way he lives his life. He lives his life with incredible piety. On the other hand, he has a unique appreciation for these secular Zionist pioneers. We'll talk more about that later. Let's now dig in to a really interesting and profound, deep, difficult, this is Surgeon General's warning, difficult example of how Rav Kook does cognitive therapy, even though he doesn't call it cognitive therapy. He changes our cognitive lenses. We see the world in a certain way, and then Rav Kook comes and he says, take off those lenses and replace them with a different set of lenses, and the world looks differently. You experience the world differently. So we're going to take what is perhaps the one of the most central experiences of Jewish life. We just went through the high holiday season where teshuvah, repentance, was a major theme. Let's take a look at the cognitive lenses that, for those who are familiar with the idea of teshuvah, of repentance, we probably are familiar with the idea. We'll look at the way it's formulated by the great Maimonides, the Rambam, in his famous law code from the 12th century, Mishneh Torah. And he says the following: what constitutes teshuvah? That a sinner should abandon his sins and remove them from his thoughts, resolving in his heart never to commit them again. As it says in Isaiah, may the wicked abandon his ways. Similarly, he must regret the past, as Jeremiah states, after I returned, I regretted. He must reach the level where he who knows the hidden, that's God, will testify concerning him that he will never return to the sin again. As the prophet Hosea says, we will no longer say to the work of our hands, an idol, you are our gods. No, never again. We're repenting and we're not going to return to our evil ways. He must verbally confess and state those matters which he resolved in his heart. And of course, that's the famous vidui or confessional that we say multiple times on Yom Kippur. So this is the classical understanding of the notion of teshuvah. Recognize that I sinned, feeling deep regret and remorse about the sin, and committing myself to never repeat it. That is classical definition of teshuvah, of return, to return to the path of God. Now, one of the most famous books that Rav Kook wrote is called The Lights of Teshuvah. It's one of the first books that he wrote, and it's something that if you ever want to study Rav Kook's teachings, this is a really good place to begin. Even though his writing is very difficult, even in Hebrew, it's very difficult. Even sometimes the translation doesn't help. Even an Israeli has a hard time, by the way, understanding Rav Kook's Hebrew. It's very abstract. It doesn't always use the same words that are used in modern Hebrew. It sometimes uses different grammatical forms, etc. It's very, very difficult. So in this book called The Lights of Teshuvah, Rabbi Kook says the following. This is introduction. For a long time now, an inner struggle goes on in me. And I feel prodded by a mighty force to speak about teshuvah. This is his introduction to explain why he's writing the book. All my thoughts are focused on this theme alone. Teshuvah, or what we would translate as repentance, holds a primary place in the teachings of Torah and in life. All the hopes of the individual and of society depend on teshuvah, repentance. It embodies a divine command that is, on the one hand, the easiest to carry out, since a stirring of the heart towards repentance is a valid expression of repentance, of teshuvah. And on the other hand, it is the most difficult to perform, since it has not yet been fully effectuated in the world and in life. Now, if you don't understand any of this, welcome aboard. Don't worry about it. My inner being impels me to speak about teshuvah, but I recoil inwardly from my intention. Am I worthy to discuss the subject of teshuvah? But no reticence can relieve me of this inner claim. I must speak about teshuvah to understand its significance for our generation and the manner of its implementation in life, the life of the individual and the life of society. Okay, now, what I want to take away from this is the following. Teshuvah is one aspect of Judaism. It's a response, as we saw from Maimonides, from the Rambam, to sin. I did something wrong. I recognize that. I feel regret, and I commit myself to not doing it again. Look at the way Rav Kook here is talking about teshuvah. All my thoughts are focused on this theme alone. How do you know he's such a sinner? He's completely obsessed by repentance. It holds a primary place in the teachings of Torah. It's one of 613 mitzvot. It's actually even a question whether it's a mitzvah or not. Maybe the confession is the mitzvah, and that's how you sort of practically implement repentance, which is in the heart. So the Torah can't dictate what's in the heart, but it can dictate the confessional. And then he talks about that he has to speak about this to explain its significance for our generation, how to implement it in the life of the individual and the life of society. Wow. Now, teshuvah, in my mind, is not fun. It doesn't make me happy. It's something which reminds us of our failings. When we say the central prayer of the Siddur, the prayer book, and we say, Slach lanu avinu ki chatanu, forgive us, God, we have sinned, there's a custom people are beating their chest. Actually, psychotherapists would be very worried about someone who goes around beating their chest 3 times a day. But that's classical repentance. So, why does Rav Kook feel so motivated to elucidate the notion of teshuvah as if it is the foundational principle of Judaism? Let's read on a little bit in another passage. The course of all existence is built on the foundation of teshuvah. All being is revealed as a descent from divinity to worldliness. This descent, however, contains within it the basis of supernal elevation. All matters become continually clarified. Now, if you understand this, you are 10 steps ahead of me, at least the first time I saw this. So if you're frustrated because this sounds like Latin, just bear with me, and you're going to understand it in a few minutes. They return to their strength with greater force through the spirit of mankind, for tshuva is his portion, his inheritance. It is the paradigm for all existence, from the highest to the lowest depths. Wow. What's he talking about? So I'm going to try to explain this in a way that speaks to me, and I hope this works for you. I don't know if you can see this. Is that visible to anybody? Would anybody like to tell me what they're seeing?
The rubber band.
Excellent! You just passed the test. You are a winner. Okay, it's a rubber band. Okay, now we're going to discuss a Kabbalistic idea now. Before the world was created, according to Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, what existed? Only God. Kabbalah struggles with the idea of how could a material limited world come into being from God? Where did God go? God was everything. God was the only thing that existed. Once the world comes into existence with rocks, trees, birds, rabbis, all kinds of measurable and limited things. That means there are things that it seems like that they're not God. So now God has been pushed aside to make room for existence. How'd that happen? You can't say that God became limited. This is one of the central struggles of Hasidic thought. Now, you see this rubber band? I'm not going to explain how the world came into being in a way that didn't limit God's existence. But that's another thing that Rabbi Fishman will be delighted to discuss at another time. But I want to just discuss one aspect of creation. So this is God here before creation, right? It's a rubber band. And creation is God expressing himself outward. Okay. Now that raises a lot of questions. Don't worry about it. There's only one point I want to make. As creation flows out of God, do you notice that this hand right here, which I'm moving up and down, that's creation. If I were to let go of this rubber band, what's going to happen? It springs right back into its source. Creation flows, as it were, out of God. And because of that, it has an internal momentum, just like this rubber band actually wants to go back to its original source. All creation, because it's flowing out of God, has built within it an internal potential momentum to return back to its source in God. Let's take a look at a quote from a very nice anthology. For those of you who become interested in Rabbi Koch's teachings, and I hope you do as a result of our discussion, there's a very nice anthology by Rabbi Ben-Zion Boxer about Rabbi Koch. It's a collection of his teachings and translation. And in its introduction, he says the following. Source number 5. For Rabbi Koch, penitence, teshuvah, is the surge of the soul for perfection, to rise above the limitations imposed by the finitude of existence. Right? The world and our soul doesn't want to remain in a state of being finite, which is removed from God. It wants to return to its source in divine infinity. It is a reach for reunion with God, from whom all existence has been separated by the descent into particularity and finitude as incidents of creation. Creation is the world moving from infinity, divine infinity, to concrete finitude, limitation, particularism, differentiation. That's the notion, that's the nature of creation of this world. But the whole world is aching to return to its source in divine infinity, perfection, unity, wholeness. It's built into the very fabric of creation, just like it's built into the fabric of this rubber band to want to return to its original posture. And then Rabbi Boxer sums up beautifully Rabbi Koch's understanding of teshuvah. Teshuvah, penitence in man, and I actually think he made a mistake, Rabbi Boxer, by calling it penitence, because penitence is a response to sin. Rav Koch is saying the response to sin is one tiny little form of teshuvah. Let's read a sentence. Penitence in man is, in other words, only one episode in the entire drama of cosmic life, which is forever seeking higher levels of development. The whole world wants to return to its state of divine perfection. It's built into the very fiber, the very fabric of existence. Teshuvah, as a response to sin, is a very small expression of teshuvah. According to Rav Kook, take off those old lenses that see teshuvah as simply a response to sin, and put on new lenses in which teshuvah is all of existence yearning to return to its divine source. It's cosmic teshuvah. It's the entire cosmos yearning for its original source in divine perfection. The whole world is doing teshuvah. Every rock, every blade of grass, every tree, every bird yearns to return to its source in divine perfection. And when we who have free will choose to be more godly, then we join that stream of moving towards our divine source. There are tremendous implications of this, and we'll have to do this rather quickly. Most rabbis then, and perhaps some rabbis even now, were rather troubled by the theory of evolution. Rav Kook says the following: the theory of evolution is increasingly conquering the world at this time, and more so than all other philosophical theories, he means scientific theories, conforms to the Kabbalistic secrets of the world. According to Rabbi Kook, the theory of evolution is Kabbalah. It's the world evolving to greater perfection. Evolution, which proceeds on a path of ascendancy, provides an optimistic foundation for the world. How is it possible to despair at a time when we see that everything evolves and ascends towards its divine source, greater perfection, greater wholeness? This is an amazing implication of these new lenses that we put on, where teshuvah is not just a response to sin. It's the entire cosmos yearning to return to its divine source. And this is true even in social movements or economic movements. Rav Kook was able to look at revolutions that are taking place in the 19th century and 20th century and see those cultural revolutions as not a threat to Torah, but in harmony with the deepest ethic of Torah, which is to join the whole world moving towards its source in divine perfection. Amazing. Now, I just want to apply this very briefly on a psychological level. You know what it feels like to do tshuva if we think of tshuva in the old lenses that we have before learning Rav Kook? Have you ever seen a picture of salmon that are swimming against the current to lay eggs? You know, that's what they do. They actually swim upstream to the place where they were hatched. They lay eggs and die. That's the life of a salmon. They die because they're swimming against the current. It's an unbelievable feat to go against the current up to the place where they themselves were hatched. That's what tshuva feels like. The world is a conspiracy against me. Everything I see is enticing me to do things I shouldn't do. All these high caloric foods around. It is not fair. It's not fair. It's a conspiracy. I'm like a salmon. In order to do tshuva, I have to go against the stream. Rav Kook says it's not true. The stream of the world is moving towards divine perfection. You're not swimming against the stream. You're like, now I'm from California, but that's about the end of the similarity here. It's like a surfer. What does a surfer do? A surfer rides the wave. That's tshuva, to ride the wave of existence. Now, getting on top of the board takes skill. It takes effort. But once you're on that board, you are flowing with the current of the ocean. And according to Rav Kook, the cosmic ocean is flowing towards divine perfection. And we just have to learn how to stand up on that Torah surfboard and flow with that current towards divine perfection. You realize how changing those lenses gives us that encouragement, empowers us to be able to make those changes in our life. Let's end with a poem that Rav Kook wrote. O poet of Teshuvah, are you yet born? And if yet in heavens is bound there your soul in the bond of life, quickly descend and arouse your violin. All of depressed heart shall hear. All of uncircumcised spirit shall listen to the sound of your harps. And they shall return and live. I think Rav Kook himself was the poet of Teshuvah, the poet who gave us new cognitive lenses to understand Teshuvah as built into the very fabric of existence, that all being is moving towards divine wholeness and inviting us to ride that wave towards divine perfection. Thank you for joining us tonight. We got very lucky, no sirens went off. I think it was in the merit of the Torah learning we did with all these beautiful people. And Bezrat Hashem, that same merit will heal all of the pain that we experience as individuals and as a nation.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is off topic, but how do you explain? This is not about Rav Kook, but how do you explain, since you said you have your grandchildren there, how do you explain what's going on with Hamas to your grandchildren, or your children explain to them? How do they cope with it?
Yeah.
Rabbi Zeff, if I can interrupt you, Brendan, it's a very important
Sandra.
question.
It's
Sandra.
Sandra.
Okay,
Yeah,
your screen is off.
fine.
Sandra, thank you very much for the question. It's an important question. I'll let Rabbi Zeff answer if he wishes to. It's a personal question.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I would do. Let me just say, yeah.
I just want to thank Rabbi Zeff. Before we go off topic, I just want to thank Rabbi Zeff for an incredible class. This is a class unlike any other that we have experienced so far in our first year of the Shah Learning Center. This is of incredible depth. These ideas are complex. These ideas are deep. I'm so happy we are recording this, because if you wish to listen to it again, you can. And we are so grateful to you, Rabbi Zeff, for your teaching. Please, please join us next week as we continue this course. This is a 5-part series. This was week 1. We have a 5-week course every Monday at 12 noon Montreal time. And if you enjoyed this, please tell your friends. And we thank you so very much. I'm going to pause the recording, but Rabbi Zeff, I'm going to keep open the room so that you can answer the personal question that was just posed to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Rabbi Fish. And then it was the light.